Moed Katan Daf Chaf Aleph continues discussing the halachos of an avel, a mourner. It begins by trying to find the source for the halacha that the tearing of clothing, kriya, has to be done standing. The Gemara will give you two sources for that and a problem on both sources. The Gemara will then bring a brisa that lists 6 halachos. The Gemara will get into a number of the halachos one by one. The halacha that in avel is not allowed to learn Torah. The halacha that in avel is not supposed to wear tefillin. Halacha that an avel is not supposed to work. Question of whether or not an avel is allowed to go be menachem avel other people. The shayla of greeting an avel: are you allowed to tell him shalom? Is he allowed to tell you shalom? And lastly, the halacha of an avel who joins the avelus late: does he count his avelus days together with them, or does he keep his own count? So let's begin. The Gemara has just said that a meimar held of the halacha that kriya, tearing of clothing, has to be done standing. If it's done in seated position, it has to be done again. So Rav Ashi asked Meimar, how do you know that? He gave a source from Eov. When Eov tore kriya, it says Vayakom Eov vayikara es milo. Eov stood up and he tore his clothing. Now the Gemara has kasha on that. 2 questions on it. The Gemara's first one is that how do you know that means, just because it says that he stood up, how do you know that means that you have to stand? We have another place where it says that somebody stood, and it doesn't mean that they have to stand. That's when a yavam says he doesn't want to do yibum. The halacha is that if somebody's husband, if a woman's husband passes away with no children, she needs to marry his brother, unless he does a procedure called chalitza, whereby he refuses to marry her. In order to do that, it says v'amad v'amar lechafatzti lekachti. He has to stand up and say, I don't want to take her. Now, Brisa says clearly he doesn't have to actually stand. It can be done seated, standing, or lying down. So there it says that he stands, but he doesn't actually stand. So when Eov stood up, doesn't mean that you have to actually stand. So the Gemara says that's different. There it doesn't say vaya'amod, and he should stand. It says v'omad. Here it says vayakam. Vayakam means he has to stand. Now the Gemara quotes that Rami Bar Chama gave the same limud. He also said that the source is from this pasuk in Eov, vayakam Eov vayikara. And the Gemara asked him a different question there. The Gemara asked, maybe the fact that he stood up is just extra. Maybe it's not that you don't have to learn from him what he did. Maybe it's just an extra thing. And I have a proof that it has to be an extra thing because Eov did something else also. It says, Vayoga Zisrosho. He shore the hair off his head. We don't have to do that. That's not part of the halachas of Avelos. So just like that's not part of the halachas of Avelos, was one of the things he did. Maybe the fact that he stood up to tear his clothing is not something you have to do. So Gemara says, okay, though, we will give another source that you have to stand. That one must stand to do kriya, and that's from where David HaMelech tore kriya on his children. He heard that his children had been killed by Avshalom. It says, Vayakam HaMelech vayikara es begadav. He stood up and he tore his clothing. Gemara says, well, same question. Maybe that was an extra thing. I didn't know that that's something he has to do. The Gemara says, I'll prove to you that it was an extra thing, because right after that, it says, Vayishkav arza, and he lay on the ground. Now, you're not supposed to lie on the ground, and Avel's not supposed to lie on the ground. He's supposed to sit on a low stool. He's supposed to turn his chair over, turn the bed over, and sit on that. As a matter of fact, if he sits on the ground, it does not count as a sign of Avelis, because people could sit on the ground without being Avelim. Gemara quotes a brisa that says somebody who sits on the ground, or on a chair, or on a grinder, or on any other low surface, it doesn't count. He has to turn the chair over and sit on a low surface that clearly shows that he's in Avelis. So Gemara says, then, therefore, the kasha is that when it says that David HaMelech lay on the ground, that is not part of Avelis. So when it says that he stood up to tear kriya, possibly also not part of Avelis. So the Gemara says no. It says he sat on the ground, it doesn't mean he really sat on the ground. It means that he sat on something low to the ground. So therefore that is part of the Avelis and everything. And that pasuk is part of the Avelis, and therefore the standing to tear kriya is part of the Avelis as well. Okay, that concludes that conversation. The Gemara now says 6 halachos. We quote a brisa, says 6 halachos that an avel is not allowed to do. An avel is not allowed to do work. He's not allowed to take a bath. Not allowed to wash himself. He's not allowed to anoint himself. He's not allowed to have marital relations. Not allowed to wear shoes. And he's not allowed to learn. Not allowed to learn the Torah, Navi, Ksuvim, Mishnah, Medrash, Halacha, Shas, Agada. Any of these things. Now the Gemara goes deeper into the halacha of not being allowed to learn. And it says that if the rabbim need him to teach, if he is a scholar and he's required to teach, then he does not withhold from teaching. The Gemara quotes a story. The son of Rav Yosi passed away in Tzipori, and he went straight to shul that day and gave a drasha the entire day because the public needed him. The Gemara has another story which will teach us halacha. The Gemara says Rabbi Bar Bachana became an avel, and he thought maybe I shouldn't go give the shir. Rav Chanina said to him, "Your rabbim tzricham light. People need you to teach." so you should not withhold from giving the shear. So he went and he was going to have a meturgaman. He was going to have a translator that's somebody who amplifies his voice and repeats what he said in a loud voice. So the Gemara said that Rav said to him, there's a brisa that says he's not allowed to have a meturgaman. He's not allowed to have somebody say over the shear for him. So therefore he has to give the shear without a person amplifying his voice. The Gemara says, but what if he can't be heard? What are you supposed to do then? The Gemara says, then you should do like what Rav Yehuda bar Eloi did when he was in Avel. He sat down and he said over his shir to Rav Chananya ben Akavya. And Rav Chananya ben Akavya gave the shir, but he wasn't loud enough. And he said it over to a Torgamon, and that Torgamon amplified it. So therefore you have 3 steps. Okay. Now the Gemara goes deeper into the halachos of these isurim. And a big part of this discussion is what is the main part of the Avelis. Gemara will say that the 7 days of Shiva has a main part that has stricter halachos than the latter parts. Now we've seen up till now a possibility that it's 3 days, the first 3 days on the main part. Now the Gemara will show an opinion that the first day is the main day, and the other days aren't such an issue, and the second day, and another opinion that the first 2 days. So we have 3 opinions. Day 1 is the main day, first 2 days are the main day, or first 3 days are the main day. So the Gemara's first discussion was about the halacha of wearing tefillin. We know that an Avel is not supposed to wear tefillin, but that's only in his main days of Avelis. So what are those main days of Avelis? So the Gemara quotes a machlokas between Rav Elazar and Rav Yeshua. Rav Elazar says the first 2 days he doesn't wear tefillin. Rav Yeshua says no, just the first 1 day he doesn't wear tefillin. Now they have a secondary machlokas, and that's if on the first day that he does wear tefillin, which would be the 3rd day according to Rav Elazar, and the 2nd day according to Rav Yeshua, what if somebody comes in and doesn't know which day he's up to? Should he take off his tefillin in order that that person should not suspect him of wearing tefillin when he's not supposed to, and maybe learn a wrong halacha? So Rav Elazar, who says that he's not supposed to wear tefillin for 2 days, says no. If he's wearing tefillin the 3rd day and somebody comes in, he should not take his tefillin off. Rav Yeshua, however, says he's only supposed to withhold from tefillin for 1 day. He says that if somebody comes in the next day and sees him wearing tefillin, he should take it off. Now, the Gemara presents that machlokas. Now the Gemara says, what is the source of each of them? How does Rav Elazar know that the first 2 days are the important days, the main days, and how does Rav Yeshua know that it's just 1 day? So the Mourner says the source of each of them and why each of them doesn't hold of the other's source. So Rav Elazar says because it says Ve'tamu Yemei B'chi Evel Moshe, and the days of the mourning for Moshe ended. So you see there that mourning is 2 days. That's the main mourning. That's Rav Elazar's source, that it's the first 2 days. Now Rav Yeshua says that's different. That was Moshe. Moshe had an extra Avelis. There was no loss quite as great as that of Moshe. Now, Rav Yeshua says, what's his source? It says a pasuk in Amos. It says, "Va'acharisa kiyom mar." In the end, somebody who violates Hashem will be thrown into mourning. The end will be a bitter day. So you see, it's 1 day. So the Gemara says, what is Rabbi Elazar going to do with that? He says, no, that's just the day of the bitterness. The main bitterness is 1 day, but the main days of mourning are the first 2 days. Okay, now what's the halacha here? So Ula gives a split psak. Ula says the halacha is like Rav Yeshua, that you only desist from tefillin for 1 day. The second day you could already wear tefillin. But he says the halacha is like Rav Elazar, that on the day that you begin, you take it off if somebody sees you. So now the Gemara is an interesting question, because Rav Elazar only said that about his first day of wearing tefillin, which is the 3rd day of Avelis. So it comes out as follows. Ula holds that you wear tefillin the first day, that you do not wear tefillin the first day, you do wear tefillin the second day. And it paskins like Rav Elazar that if somebody sees you wearing tefillin the 3rd day, you don't take it off. What about if somebody sees you wearing tefillin the second day? You can't learn anything from Rav Elazar there, because Rav Elazar said you don't wear tefillin the second day. To the fact of Rav Elazar that we paskin like Rav Elazar that if somebody sees you, you take it off. That he says that if someone sees you, you do not take it off. That only helps us for the 3rd day. What about the second day? Should I take it off on the second day or not? So the Gemara quotes split decisions here. So the Gemara says, we have a quote of Ula that says you take it off even 100 times in the same day. That's if people come in, you take it off, and if then that person leaves, you put it back on, and then if somebody else comes in, then you take it off following that, even if it happens 100 times. Some more quotes of Brisa that says that. If Yehuda ben Tema says, take it off, put it back on, even 100 times in 1 day. Now the Gemara notes on that topic, whether you should put it on and off more than once a day. The Gemara says that Rava disagrees. Rava says once you put it on, you don't take it off. All right, now the Gemara says, hold on a second. Rava seems to be going along with this psak here, but Rava holds that the first 3 days are the main days. So how's Rava even getting involved in this discussion what to do on the third day? Rava holds that for 3 days are the main days of Avelis, and therefore he should hold that one does not wear tefillin all the first 3 days. Rava says, no, that's only as far as the other halachas. But as far as a mitzvah, Rava would agree that a person should wear tefillin on the third day. You don't say it's 3 main days of Avelis. Okay, now the Gemara goes to the halacha of doing malacha. Is an avel allowed to do malacha? So the Gemara says the first 3 days, an avel is not allowed to do any work. Even if somebody is poor and he takes charity to survive, he cannot go to work on the first 3 days. After the first 3 days, until the end of Shiva, he can do work privately if he needs to in his house. And a woman is allowed to spin with a spinning needle in the normal way, only inside her house in a private way. Cannot do public work. All right, now the Gemara goes to the halacha of going to another morning to console someone else. So we're going to the Brisa that says the first 3 days, an avel does not go to console anybody else. After the first 3 days, he can go, but he does not sit in the place of the consolers. He sits in the place of the mourners, even though he's not one of the mourners of that house, and he's consoling the person there. Okay, now the Gemara goes into a lengthy discussion about greeting a mourner. Now, one of the halachos of a mourner is that you're not supposed to give shalom, not supposed to greet him. So the Gemara has a couple of different halachos here. The Gemara is going to divide it up into a number of stages and discuss what the halachos are. We're going to have 3 contradictory brises. So the stages are as follows. We have the first 3 days. We have day 3 through 7. We have day 7 through 30. We have day 30 through the end of 12 months. And then we have after 12 months. What are the potential halachos? So the most strict halacha would be that he cannot greet anyone and he cannot answer if somebody greets him. A lesser halacha would be that he can't greet someone, but if somebody greets him, he can answer. A lesser halacha, a less strict halacha would be that he can greet and he can return. The Gemara is going to say that it's a possible situation where he can greet someone, but that person can't greet him. Now, let's go through the brises over here. So the Gemara first brings the first brisa. The brisa says that in the first 3 days, he cannot answer. The implication is that he cannot ask, he cannot answer, he's not allowed to do anything. He's not even allowed to answer. Now, day 3 through 7, the brisa says he can answer. If somebody greets him, he's allowed to answer that. And day 7 through day 30, he's allowed to ask. That implies, the Gemara understands at this point, that he's allowed to do anything. He's allowed to ask shalom, and he's allowed to answer shalom. He's allowed to do all those things. So now the Gemara says that there's a contradictory halacha. First of all, we have a contradiction from an action of Rabbi Akiva. Then we have a contradictory brisa. Problem from Rabbi Akiva, the Gemara says, is that there was an incident that happened. There's a brisa that brings it. Rabbi Akiva lost a son. And while he was mourning, Klal Yisrael came in mass to be Menachem Avel, and they gave great hespedim, they gave eulogies, and as they were leaving, Rabbi Akiva stood up on the bench, on a large bench, and he said, "My brothers, Beis Yisrael, please listen. Even if I had lost 2 married children, the great cover that you showed would have consoled me." And he had only lost 1 unmarried child, so certainly he was consoled. And he said, if you came for me, if you came for Akiva, there are many Akivas in the street, so you didn't come just because of Akiva, you obviously came for the Torah that I learned, and therefore your schar is twice as great because you came to honor the Torah. Therefore go to your homes, lish shalom. So you see, he gave shalom. How is he allowed to give shalom? During mourning, we said that one is not allowed to greet and give shalom to others. So this is different. This was a rabbin. The cover of the rabbin is greater. But that doesn't show what the halacha is in the case of something like our brisa, which is just greeting an individual. Okay, so now the Gemara has a kasha from our brisa. Our brisa had said that from day 3 through day 7, he can answer a greeting, but he should not greet someone else. We have a brisa that says that from day... our brisa also implied that from day 7 through day 30, he's allowed to ask, which implies that he's allowed to do anything, allowed to ask or answer. The Gemara says we have a brisa that says if somebody meets an avel and within 30 days, he should not greet the avel, should not give shalom to the avel. So the Gemara says that seems contradicted. We said that between day 7 and day 30, the avel is allowed to himself ask. So let's quote the brisa in full. It says that somebody who meets his friend within 30 days should not give him tanchumin, he should not say hamakom, and he should not greet him, he should not ask his shalom. After 30 days, he can ask shalom, and he should not say tanchumin. Already the mourning period is over, and therefore you should not give tanchumin. Now, if that person lost his wife and he married another wife, he may not come to console him in his house, because that man has his new wife there. That woman would be upset, or she would be offended if somebody gave tanchumin to her husband over his previous wife in her presence. But if he meets him in the shuk, he can give him tanchumin with a soft lip and with a heavy head, meaning he could, in a very serious way, give him greetings. All right, so anyway, we have the contradiction here as far as what the halacha is between day 7 and day 30. Our Brisa had seemed to say that he's allowed to do anything. It even said he's allowed to ask shalom. And this Brisa says that someone is not allowed to give him shalom. So the Gemara answers, those are two different halachos. Our Brisa just said he's allowed to ask shalom. That's because the person that he's greeting has shalom, and there's nothing wrong with him, the Avel, asking shalom. However, for somebody to ask his shalom, even day 7 to day 30, that's not allowed, because he's still within 30 days of Avelos, and there's no shalom. So even our Brisa, which said he's allowed to give shalom, does not mean that someone's allowed to greet him. So Gemara says, hold on a second, but our Brisa had said that between day 3 and day 7, he's allowed to answer. So if he's allowed to answer, that implies that someone is allowed to greet him. If somebody's allowed to greet him, then that's total contradiction to what you're saying, because you're saying that no one's even allowed to greet him even after day 7, and our Brisa even said between day 3 and day 7 he's allowed to answer. That implies someone's allowed to greet him. Somewhere says no one's allowed to greet him then. However, if somebody doesn't know he's an Avel and greets him, he's allowed to answer. Whereas says, well, if that's the case, if we're talking about somebody who doesn't know he's an Avel, so even day 1 through day 3 he should be allowed to answer. Somewhere says no, day 1 through day 3 he's not allowed to answer, even somebody who greets him without knowing he's an Avel. He has to tell that person, I'm an Avel, I cannot give you shalom back. Day 3 through day 7 he cannot greet anyone, but he can answer somebody who doesn't know that he's an Avel. He should just give him shalom back. After that, day 7 through day 30, he can greet someone, but no one should ask him shalom. If somebody, of course, asks him, he's allowed to answer. And then after that, then he's even allowed to ask b'shalom, as we shall see in Brises going forward. Now, the Gemara quotes another Brisa which seems to be contradictory. This Brisa discusses what happens between day 30 and 12 months. So the Brisa says as follows. Somebody who meets his friend between day 30 and 12 months, he's allowed to be menachem him, and he should not ask b'shleima. He should not give shalom. And again, that contradicts what we said, because we had said before there was only between day 7 and day 30 that someone should not give him shalom. But here it says that he's not allowed to ask. So the Brisa there continues, and it says that he should not give tanchumin, but he can give tanchumin min hatzad. It means he could say you should be misnachem without mentioning the name of the dead person, because you don't want to remind him of the loss that he has. Now the Gemara quotes a statement of Rabbi Meir. It says not to quote or not to remind someone of his loss after 12 months. He says somebody meets his friend after 12 months who's of his avelos, and he gives him tanchumin in a straight up way, reminding him of his loss. What's that like? It's like somebody who broke a leg and the leg healed, and he meets a doctor, and the doctor says, come to me, I'll break your leg again, and I'll heal it for you just to show what a good healer I am. So this guy is willing to hurt the guy in order to console him. He's willing to remind him of his loss just to be able to give him consolation. Just be quiet, you're better off. So anyway, what we see from here is that even from 30 days to 12 months, one is not supposed to ask b'shalom, and we said before that it was only between 7 to 30 days that he's not supposed to ask b'shalom. The Gemara answers that we're talking about different types of losses. Day 7 to day 30 is talking about the loss of any of the relatives other than the father or mother, the loss of a parent. That strict halachos, that's until 12 months he's an avel and one should not give him shalom. But for any other loss, it's until 30 days and one should not give him shalom. So Gemara says, if that's the case, so why do you have to, you should be able to give tanchumin min hatzad? Gemara says, yeah, you are allowed to give tanchumin min hatzad, you are allowed to greet, you are allowed to give a consolation in an indirect way, but what we meant to say was you should not give tanchumin in the normal way. Okay, now the Gemara moves on to a totally different discussion. That's halacha. What if somebody comes and joins the mourners late? You have a relative who is far away, and he came to join, and by the time he arrives, the mourning is already a few days underway. So the Brisa says if he comes within the first 3 days, he can join their avelos. He does not have to start from day 1. And when they finish, he finishes too, even though it wasn't a full 7 days for him, but his avelos follows their count of avelos. Now, that's only if he comes from a close by place. Even if he wasn't with them and he didn't start, it becomes from close by. If he comes from far away, he has to keep his own count. Now, if, however, he comes after 3 days, even if he comes from a close place, there he has to keep his own count. So the halacha, therefore, will be as follows. You need to have both factors to keep the count of the people that you're joining, that this mourner is joining. It has to be that he came from a close place and they were in the first 3 days. The Gemara adds a third condition, and that's it has to be that the leader of the family was in the place that he's arriving at. If he is the leader of the family and they weren't, then he cannot say that he's going to join with them. He can only join with the leader of the family which was in this place. So now you have to have three conditions: coming from a close place within the first 3 days and finding the leader of the family there. The Gemara will continue these halachos in the next daf.